All right, I'm gonna need all my lover girls up to the front. It's time to have a hard conversation today. Are you in love with the idea of love? Well, today's episode is probably for you.
Oh, y'all are not gonna like this one.
Hate to break it to you, but it's time to stop romanticizing romance. Ladies, please remember, words are free. It costs a man nothing to say words. It costs a man nothing to lie. You're listening to Hot Takes by Anna. All right, everyone, welcome back to Hot Takes by Anna, episode 6. Thank you for joining me today and being here on this journey. So today's episode, as you can see by the title, is going to be talking about the weaponization of romance. And this is not going to be a very fun topic. I know I often have to give that disclaimer on this show in terms of the subject matter I talk about, and today's subject is no exception. I know we all love romance as women, no shame in that, but I think that some unpacking and deconstructing of this notion is long overdue. So let's get right into this. Let me preface by saying I am the biggest lover girl you will ever meet, okay? For those who are only listening and not watching, I have got my giant chunky heart earrings and necklace on. I love love. I love hearts. I love romance. I am very much the, stereotypical lover girl in that sense, and have been that way for as long as I can remember. Now, of course, I'm kind of on this journey and unpacking how much of that is just true to the core of who I am and how much of it is social conditioning, something we talk about quite often. But I do think that it's high time we talk about the dynamics of romance as we have come to know it and how that plays a role in upholding the patriarchy, unfortunately. I think that at a certain point, as fun as the love and the ooey gooey romance and the, ooey gooey feelings, as fun as all of that is, if you are a straight woman in today's society and today's system of patriarchy, at a certain point, we got to get real. We got to get real with ourselves in terms of just, how this idea of romance is functioning and how it's functioning to keep us further trapped in the patriarchy, trapped in this role where our lives are heavily dependent on men's role in our lives. And I think, again, it's time we deconstruct it. It's time that we unpack all of this and get to the root of what's going on, right? So let's kind of back up in terms of what is romance, and how did this idea really start? I think in terms of where romance came from, who started it, that can be a little bit difficult to answer, right? And I did a lot of research for this episode specifically, just kind of trying to, learn a little bit more about the history of romance, right? And there's a lot of different claims out there, all of which are very interesting. I think that all of them have a lot of validity and truth to them, There's, of course, kind of this idea that romance, as we now know it today, has been alive since really the start of patriarchal societies, right? About 10 to 12,000 years ago, when this whole system of women having to get married to a man who will then essentially own her, and then the bloodline is passed on, and the last name, the inheritance, and all of that stuff is centered on the male side. That, with the rise of patriarchy, something had to come about, and all these ideas and systems had to come into play that would be able to reinforce this very unnatural system, right? I know we've talked about that before, too, about how patriarchy is actually not natural at all. So obviously, with the rise of patriarchy came the rise of a lot of reinforcing ideas and structures and paradigms that had to be in place. So many people will say that, as long ago as 10,000 years ago, or whenever the patriarchy started, that's when men kind of put this idea in place of the lovey-dovey wooing women, because there had to be some incentive to get the women to be down with this too. But at the same time, there's a lot of other claims. Another really interesting one that I saw recently was from this creator. Her name is Boonmi Supreme on Instagram, but she's fantastic. She talks about a lot of really, really interesting feminist theory and kind of how that intersects with race and class and other structures. But her idea is that the romance that we know of today was actually created by white women in the 1800s when, this structure was in place in Europe where women were, of course, having to get typically married off to men by their family. And, there was a rise of all this literature, and it was kind of the romance period in general going on in Europe at this time, right? But in line with that whole romantic movement, white women took this whole idea of, heterosexual romance with a man to another level, essentially as a coping mechanism, is what she claimed. I thought that was really interesting, that, white women knew that, like, hey, we're going to be stuck with this guy no matter what. And so that's kind of where this brooding archetype of this man who has this hard exterior and only I, his loving wife, can get through to him. Like, she's essentially saying that that's where that idea comes from. And I thought that was interesting. I thought there's a lot of validity to that as well. But through my journey of kind of researching the different ideas of who created romance, when did it come about? Again, a lot of different claims out there. However, I think right now what I find the most interesting is how is it functioning today, still in 2026, in this, modern era where I think a lot of women and men, I think society as a whole, I think a lot of people in general are still under the impression that we have made so much progress and we're doing so great and we've achieved equality of the sexes for the most part. But, I think in that, when you look at it in that whole context and seeing how, hey, romance is still, it's still got a chokehold on the girlies in ways that I don't think most of the girlies are even aware of. And that's what I kind of want to get into dissecting today. I think either way, whoever did create romance as we know it, I think it's safe to say that currently in this modern era, it is very much being hijacked by men, whether the men even realize it or not, right? I think whether they're consciously playing into this idea of romance to keep women on the hook, or if they've just been conditioned just like us to be like, okay, well, these are the things that I do as a man and the women like it and whatever, whether it's intentional or not, whether it's a malicious thought or not, I do think that romance now in this day and age has really been hijacked by men and is currently still being used to essentially keep women where they are, keep them in their feminine role, keep them in this position of submission, essentially. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about how and where we see romance still show up in this day and age and how it's still operating to reinforce the patriarchy. Well, when you think about it, we have made, as we've talked about before on this show, we have made a lot of advancements as women, right? Especially, certain parts of the world, we're seeing it manifesting differently than others. But I think, in terms of the Western world and women being able to work and vote, who knows, maybe not for long. But as of right now, women can vote. We can drive a car. We can have a bank account. We can go to school. We can get educated. We can get jobs. And so we have these things that have really, in the grand scheme of history, drastically changed materially, right, over the past 50 years or so. And so that's kind of where we're at, this impasse that I know I talked about on my very first episode of how, late stage feminism, and now we're seeing a lot of contradictions and how essentially how men and women are to move forward together. Where do we go from here? But with these material advancements for women being able to essentially support themselves and not needing to marry a man like they needed to in the past, because again, in the past, it was like you either got married to a man or, you were exiled from society. Like you had to be married to a man in order to have any sort of financial standing, to have any of your basic needs met in society. Now that's not the case. So, I think when we step back and say, well, why are women still willingly entering into partnerships with their apex predator and still just upholding this traditional system of the nuclear family and the patriarchy and the conservative values. Why do we do that when we don't need to anymore? This is a thought that I've had kind of running around in my head for the past year or so. And I mean, one day it just became clear to me. I was like, it's this notion of romance. It's really, at this point, it's just the feelingsy part of it. That's it. I mean, why else would women have to continue subjecting ourselves to these antiquated ideas of, you know, love and marriage and the power structures, and just still willingly entering into these types of arrangements when we don't need to? It's the romance. It's this messaging that is being pounded into our heads as women from the moment we're born, from the moment that we're old enough to even have thoughts. We're seeing it in the media. We're seeing it, you know, even when materially we can see that most of these heterosexual marriages that are being modeled around us may not be this lovey-dovey, happy, perfect little romance. We're still being told by the people in those relationships, like, no, love above all else, love is everything. And we're just being sold this idea of romantic heterosexual love as the be-all end-all. And it's just really interesting because when you take a step back and look at it for what it really is, you can just see that, I mean, again, like I said, it's just feelings and words at the end of the day, right? You've got all of these women. I mean, it's just more examples than I can count of women I know who are in partnerships with, you know, at best, a mediocre man who isn't really doing anything for her life. At worst, you know, a manipulative, abusive, harmful one. And you look at all these examples and it's like, what is this guy materially adding to your life? And, you know, if you were to ever actually put these women on the spot and ask them, and I have before, right? I've asked friends this question of like, why do you stay with him? And, oh, well, he loves me. He gets me. He just, it's the love. It's the emotions. And it's like, okay, I mean, you know, again, when you look at it for what it really is that really a good enough reason to just be in this position of, you know, just willingly being, you know, this caretaker, therapist, all these things we've talked about before, that the invisible labor that women do for men? Are these words and these emotions that this man is giving you worth all of that? And I contend that, again, if women were to step back and look at things from a bird's eye view, they would realize, for the most part, no, you're not really bringing anything to the table. And the real gag is, I think most women, especially any woman with an even remotely decently healthy female friendship, she's probably getting far more emotional validation or whatever she claims she's getting from her man, far more of that from the female friends than from her male partner. And again, that's where this brainwashing and conditioning comes into play. It is true brainwashing. I do not believe I'm being dramatic or hyperbolic when I say that it is brainwashing that has told women that romance with a man is the be-all end-all, because you look at it for what it is and you see that this idea of romance is not bringing any tangible, real benefit into women's lives. And I think men know that. Again, I don't know if it's, I think sometimes, you know, the really manipulative, strategic ones can really, really grab a hold of this idea of romance and really take it to the next level and use it to manipulate women. I see it all the time. But again, I think even the men who aren't doing it consciously, they have been told the same messaging the women have, right? Like, we as women are getting this whole like, oh, romance is lovely, you love it, this and that, you want it from a man. And then the men are seeing that too, and they're seeing, oh, so that's what women like. Okay, cool, simple. All I need to do is do all of that. I think it's really evidenced, though, in the way that we see it show up, you know, in our day-to-day lives, in just basic, you know, patterns and rituals and traditions that we just consider normal, right? I think of like weddings. right? You know, who gets most excited about the wedding? Obviously, it's the bride, right? It's the, you know, the photos of can't wait to marry my person, countdown every, you know, 56 days out of your wedding. Oh, the love, who's the ones usually posting the long excited captions on Instagram about how excited they are to get married and to have found their person, and just, you know, the wedding dress shopping and the hype behind that and the hype behind the showers and all these little things that women get so excited about. And I'm not, you know, I'm not knocking the women that do still in this day and age get excited about weddings. Again, I think it's just become so normalized, and it's how we've been conditioned to act. But I think, again, looking at it for what it is through the rose, you know, taking off the rose-colored glasses and seeing weddings and the reaction to them and the role of the groom versus the bride in the weddings and the whole pre-wedding experience, you look at that and you can just very clearly see it's like, yeah, no, romance is for women. Like, romance is for women. I mean, there needed to be something to get women excited about, you know, losing their last name and identity and becoming a built-in sex doll and made for the rest of their life to a man, right? Like, you gotta get them excited somehow. So I think that you see that with the wedding stuff. I think you see it with things like Valentine's Day, other occasions that are made to celebrate this idea of romantic love, which again, in theory, is supposed to be, you know, romance is supposed to be great and so exciting for both parties. That's what we're being told. You know, both parties should love romance and be romantic towards each other. But as we see clearly in front of us, it's the women that are getting most excited about it. Romance novels. Typically, romance novels are written by women. I think more so as a form of escapism, especially in this day and age. But men will make fun of women for being into romance novels and rom-coms and stuff like that, right? It's just kind of a silly little joke. I think that's another example of where the proof is in the pudding, guys. Like, we see, like, men make fun of women for being into these things, and it's like, see, even they think it's silly, and they're telling us with their actions that they think it's silly, and that they know that it's just a frivolous little thing that women enjoy. And I think we just need to start looking at that with a more critical lens, because unfortunately, still in this day and age, I believe that romance is keeping women trapped. I believe, in fact, that it is the last remaining obstacle that women really need to overcome in order to be fully radicalized, if you will, to have the veil permanently ripped off once and for all, is to realize that the last remaining major obstacle mentally for women, I believe, is this immaterial, this woo idea of the feelings and the romance, and that being something that we should all be aiming for and striving for. It is really sad to see how it still comes up in a day-to-day basis. You know, I know many women who I love dearly. I have a lot of friends who are in very different parts of their, or very different stages of their men decentering journeys, let's just put it that way. Or maybe have not yet embarked on a men decentering journey at all. But I mean, just the other day, I think of an example where a friend who has been talking to this guy, I guess I would say, her boyfriend, if you will, and they've been involved for about 6 months, but it's unfortunately a very, I hate to say it, but it's kind of your typical dynamic, fairly emotionally unavailable man. He's fine. I've met him. He's a nice enough guy, right? But in the terms of their interpersonal dynamic with each other, very emotionally avoidant, unavailable. She's very loving, doting, and that's just kind of been the general dynamic that I've observed throughout their relationship. And the other day she was telling me that, wow, he was really, really sweet for the first time ever. He said one line that was really out of character for him, something along the lines of, "You're the sparkle of my eye." And she just got so excited about that. She was showing me the screenshots and like, "Oh, I just love hearing you say that. Like, what do you need from me? Like, let's go jet off together, like on a vacation. I'll pay for it. You know, I'll do this. I'll be here for you. And I'm just looking at her like, girl, like, do you see what you're doing? And I did kind of have to gently say that, contrary to popular belief, I do know how to filter my message depending on my audience. And so I'm not always walking around with all of my friends saying, you're an idiot, you're a moron, fuck that guy. But, with this friend, I was like, I mean, he just said some words and you're now going head over heels, going crazy, thinking you need to thank him and reward him for saying this corny little line, you're the sparkle of my eye, or whatever it was, right? And I just think that's still, unfortunately, a very common theme that I see with women. It's just taking the bare minimum from men. Men saying these, corny romantic lines because they know women like it. And then, unfortunately, we do respond favorably to that. And so this is just how the cycle continues. But if we were to really, really take a stand and say, no, wait a minute, what are you actually bringing to my life? How are you actually materially benefiting me? Because as we've discussed, men, especially in the current system of patriarchy that we live in, they are off the bat just automatically by being romantically partnered by a woman. They're already reaping a ton of tangible benefits. Having the woman there on their arm, getting the social capital, the respect from other men. Typically that means, built-in consistent sex for them. Typically because of the way women are socialized versus the way that men are, the woman's going to be more naturally inclined and more naturally competent at taking care of herself. And therefore, if she's living with the man as well, he reaps the benefits of, the house being cleaner and the woman doing all these things that she's been told all of her life that she has to do, right? And so men are already automatically, just from the moment they get into that partnership with a woman, no matter who the woman is, no matter what her talents are, how her personality is, they're already reaping a lot of tangible benefits. So in this day and age where, it's no longer men are the only providers and women are out here having to support ourselves too and do essentially everything for ourselves before we even end up meeting a man, what's a man bringing to the table, right? Besides love and romance. And I really think that you guys would be horrified if you were to start looking at heterosexual relationships through this lens. If you were to start really observing in your day-to-day life the hetero couples and just being like, okay, well, what is this guy actually bringing to her life? I think more often than not, your answer would be emotions and feelings and romance, right? And at what point do we start looking at this with a more critical lens, not only at a structural level, but again, in our own individual relationships, right? I think that in order for women to be able to advance and be able to fully decenter men, we're going to have to decenter this idea of romance as the end goal, heterosexual romance, at least, because I think at the end of the day, the really hard truth, and y'all know I have a lot of those. This is just another one of those really difficult pills to swallow. But if you, in this day and age, are a straight woman who desires partnership with a straight man, I think you're going to have to get very real with yourself about the fact that this romantic, loving, doting man who just deeply understands you and gives you this emotional fulfillment, these men that you see in the romance novels and the movies, he's likely not out there. Take however long you need to for that to sink in, but that guy is likely not out there. Could he be? Yes. I know y'all love to cling on to exceptions. Sure, maybe he exists. And I do see this evidenced in the very few and far between healthy heterosexual relationships that I see in my life. There's a handful of them, right? But for the most part, understanding that this idea we've been sold of this, again, the loving, doting man who's also still a strong protector and will, fight off, predators for you, but also is loving and soft and caring and just gets you. That's kind of a fairy tale, guys. These men that we look towards in the media, in literature, most of the time you will find they are written by women. The vast majority of the time, these male characters are written by women. And so if you in your real life are looking around for this man who both brings material and tangible benefits into your life and also has the emotional depth you're looking for and this lovey-dovey, soft, romantic side, very few and far between, guys, because men weren't really socialized to have all these qualities either, right? Men have not been given the tools to be this provider and this, strong leader, while also being emotionally intelligent. I know we've talked about that a little bit in the past too. So it's not even that it's necessarily these men's fault. It's just that they don't have the tools to be this person that women are seeking. And I think it's time that we get real about that. So I guess the question now would be, because I'm sure that many of you are like, well, Anna, now I'm depressed. Like, where do we go from here? I don't know the answer for sure, but I will say, I don't think that all hope is entirely lost, right? I think that if you are a straight woman wanting to continue to pursue romantic partnership with a man, your best bet is probably finding a man who has been equally brainwashed by the idea of romance as women have, because there are a few out there and they exist, right? If women are being sold this message, like I kind of touched on earlier, men are out there being sold the message as well. And while I think that, again, there are several men who learn to manipulate and strategically take advantage of that message to target women, there are just as many, I shouldn't say just as many, but there are also your lover boys out there. The yearning lover boys exist. And I think that if you're a woman who's trying to find a man with emotional depth who also is into the feelings romancy thing that you're craving, then find a man that's like that. They do exist. I know, shocker, but as of today, March 8th, when I'm recording this episode, I actually went on a date with a guy recently. We're gonna go on another one. I'm being cautiously optimistic. Don't know where it's gonna go. As you all know, I have a lot of there's a lot of levels of clearance that this guy or any guy theoretically would need to go through in order to, for me to say, yeah, I'm going to become exclusive and partner with you. But so far, so good, right? Cautious optimism, informed optimism. But this guy, one thing I noticed about him is he does seem to have kind of that yearning lover boy element to him, right? He just kind of like, I just want one girl for the rest of my life and to die together and to do all the romantic and the custom matching PJ sets and the, all the romantic gestures. Like, he seems to be into that. Like I said, men are out there and it exists. So if you're a straight woman, make sure you're going for that type of guy if you want to be with a man. And even then, like I said, there's a lot more levels of clearance, but I think that should kind of be the bare minimum. I think just the idea of being conscious of the fact that, hey, the vast majority of men are not into romance the way women are, and, worst case scenario, will use it to manipulate you. I think just being conscious of that fact and keeping it in mind when trying to select a partner, I think would go a really long way. And then there's also, I think, kind of the final point, which I'd like to expand on more in later episodes. But I think that, if you're not entirely convinced you're 100% heterosexual as a woman and you must be with a heterosexual man, I see the queer community doing romance a lot better. Let me just put it that way. I do think romance actually does exist, and maybe that's a disclaimer I should have included at the beginning of this episode, right? Is that my intention isn't to say that romance is a complete scam and give it up, you're never going to find these romantic feelings that you're searching for from anyone, because I do look at the queer community and I see a lot of romance there, and it's, it's not tainted by this oppressive power dynamic of patriarchy, of the whole heterosexual man-woman thing. And so it exists, I think, a lot more and in a lot, typically probably healthier ways in the queer community. So again, I know the general consensus is that one cannot just wake up and change their sexuality, but I'm just going to leave that disclaimer out there. I think the queer community does romance better, so if that's something you're into, you're probably going to have a lot better luck with romance in that regard. So again, not all hope is lost, but I think the main takeaway at the end of the day here is that we should start looking at these things through a more critical lens. I say this about pretty much every topic we cover on this show. What you do with that information once you've examined it, that's not my job to tell you. I can't tell you what to do, but I think that the biggest and most important step is waking up, looking at these things in a different perspective, and maybe taking note of the ways that, even us, women who consider ourselves feminists, who consider ourselves very progressive, the way that even we are still being conned, I'm going to use that word, conned, into submission and into staying in our place. So I will leave you with that today. Thank you all for listening. Really appreciate you tuning in. As always, please share with anyone, even if you think they would hate it. Would love to get as many listeners as I can at this point. And as always, I appreciate you, and we'll catch you in the next episode.